I'd put you in my pocket, push the button through the hole to lock it. Hold on to you, you're like a treasure. Walk across my hand, it'd be a pleasure. You could come with me. You could come with me. Oh, you're such a sweet little misfit. When your smile falls down, I wanna lift it. Wanna make you better. Wanna run away together.
This is Delicious of History, a podcast about interesting people you probably didn't learn about in school. I am Fega, and I am your American history person. I'm bad at this.
I think every time we should just reinvent ourselves a little bit.
Well, that's the goal, but like I am not yes-anding very well.
What? Okay. Hello, I'm Isabella, and I am an avid learner of American history, but not an expert by any means of the imagination.
I mean, I don't know if I'm an expert either, but
I would call you an expert. I would say you are very much an expert. And Fega is an expert of U.S. American history.
I mean, I think there's some actual experts that would take. I have a good broad knowledge.
You know what? I think you read more books on average than about American history than 99% of the American population.
Well, okay, if you're talking about the general American population,
well, then that makes you an expert.
Sure,
I think you're up there. I think you're up there. You know a lot. You know a lot.
I mostly read nonfiction, not because I don't like fiction, but because I have toxic, puritanical, cultural ideas about the use of my time.
Ooh, that one. I feel like you just read me a little bit.
Yeah.
I did bring my workbooks to read tomorrow on Shabbos.
Yo.
One day I'll have to probably look inside myself and have a stern talk with myself about that. But
I just spilled tea on myself.
Oh no.
Which goes into what we thought we should talk about at the beginning of this, which has nothing to do with the person we're talking about today, but I don't care.
You have some great mugs. And Ben also has some great mugs. And I want to know, you've mentioned to me that you are an avid mug collector, which I think absolutely blends with everything else I know about you.
Yeah, I need to get like a display thing. Like I want to get like hooks to put up on. I have this like dead wall, so to speak, in my kitchen, and I want to get hooks to put things up because right now they're all just like shoved into a cabinet,
a mug wall.
Yeah,
so cute.
There was a breakfast place when I lived in Ohio that had a mug wall that I thought was really sweet.
Oh my goodness, that would be. I hope you do it.
But it's that same inclination of like, if I'm gonna buy some merch or whatever, I want it to be something that's useful.
For sure.
So
I love it. What's your favorite?
I mean, my favorite was made by a friend of mine who I actually went to summer camp with. It's people listening to this podcast are gonna think my only friends are from summer camp, and they would not be wrong. But she can speak and write in many old-timey languages like Latin, and she tried to sell this mug that said Epstein didn't kill himself in Middle Egyptian, which for those of us who are not knowledgeable about Egypt's language history, the rest of us would call it hieroglyphs.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Love it. Okay.
Yeah. So
that's good to know for my future. I can sound more like an expert.
I know, right? Like when you say Middle Egyptian, people are like, "Oh, you know a thing." I don't.
No, no, because that sounds like that guy on TikTok. What's his name? Adam.
The Adam ruins everything guy, or a different Adam?
The guy who just like speaks in really old languages.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Oh, him, the one who like reads Beowulf and stuff.
Yeah, he has the hair.
Yeah. Sorry, a car just turned on. Not that like we have
vroom,
perfectly like silent recording space. Clearly not. But
we're in South Philly. This is a really noisy place.
Yeah,
and there's really so little we could do about it
without like, I don't know.
Think of it as part of the environment. You know, where we are as people. We're in the ambiance of South Philly today, at least.
So mugs, I have. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
I also have one of my hobbies is I shape note sing, which is a social singing tradition. Mm-hmm. And it is a very old one that tends to involve a lot of religious music. And when there's religious music that is old, anti-Semitism is a thing that
comes
appears. And so there is
time.
a song that is in one of the books that people sing from a lot that includes the verse that we will protect the church from envious Jews. And so as a Hanukkah gift for Ben, Issa's partner and my very good friend from camp, I had mugs made that have the music of that song on them, and on the other side it says "Envious Jew."
Yeah,
so I'm fond of that.
That's a great one. I was going to actually mention the Envious Jew mug, but didn't know how to explain it, and I'm really glad you took that on. It's a really good mug. It's a really good mug.
But to continue from the last episode, which from our perspective happened 20 minutes ago,
exactly.
I have a Fundy Fridays mug that I'm very fond of as well.
Yes.
It's the one that the proceeds went to support abortion access.
Oh, nice.
And it's like making fun of like a TikTok from some, I don't know, fundamentalist guy who had the most unhinged Dunkin' Donuts order. Like, I don't remember what it was, but it was like 5 creamers and 10 sugars. Like, it's one of those you listen to and you're like, is there coffee?
Is there coffee? My sister went to a Dunkin' Donuts a few months ago, and a guy ordered his coffee with 16 sugars. And
I mean, live your life.
Live your life. Live your life. I would
not drink it.
I would not drink it. I think that's insane, but I'm also not going to say like, what a low life for putting 16 sugars.
No,
that's just what he likes. Like people, I think one thing that we don't talk about enough. Yeah. No one's talking about this, but you know how there's a spicy scale? I think there's also like, you know, you get used to a certain level of spice.
Yeah.
You know, if you live in different places, lots of spices. There's also like a sweetness scale. Like Midwest sweet is a different kind of sweet.
Yes, it is.
You know, there's like they're doing something different. They are drinking sweeter things on a daily basis.
And even so that's like within the United States, but you talk to people from Europe and they come here and they're like, what is wrong? Like, I remember when I went to Germany and I got a Fanta, and Fanta had just been released in the United States. Obviously it was in Europe for ages and ages. Yeah, now that song is in my head.
Sorry.
I tried Fanta in Germany and I was disappointed because I was used to an American concoction that has a lot more sweetness to it.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
I brought up the Fundy Fridays mug not just because I'm fond of it, but also because that was my attempt at somehow connecting to the actual topic.
A segue.
It was a very interesting segue.
Yeah.
Because today we were talking about the public universal friend.
Yes.
Which is one of these things they've become very popular on the internet. If you are on gay internet,
yes,
as it were. Actually, yes. Last night I was running a program, and where I work, the lanyards they give us are rainbow.
Awesome.
And I mean, we are a very queer affirming place, but I don't think that's why they picked a rainbow lanyard. I think they just thought it was pretty. Mm-hmm. So I'm wearing this lanyard, and this was like a painting class for adults. And this older woman walks in, she's very nice or whatever, and she looks and she goes, "Are you gay?" And that day I was definitely dressed more masculinely. Mm-hmm. So I was a little taken aback. Also, when people this place is in rural New Jersey, so when people just are like, "Are you gay?" I'm like, "Are you taking a poll?" Like, and so
I collecting names.
Yeah, like, what's happening here? So I said, yes, and she goes, I wondered because of the lanyard. And I was like, oh, I mean, I am gay, the lanyard has nothing to do with it. And then she wanted to tell me about how she saw a welcome mat at IKEA with a rainbow on it, and she saw this thing and decided that any gay person she saw, she needed to tell them about this product that they could purchase from IKEA with a rainbow on it, which is very sweet and also hilarious.
It is very sweet and hilarious. That's how kind of her. It's as if we didn't know where to get the rainbows. They're everywhere. We have lots of them. Well, now the corporate pride is out here.
Yeah,
rainbows are very easy to get.
Very much so. But
I'm glad she had our best interests at heart.
Yes. So gay internet has been very excited about the public universal friend for a variety of reasons that we're going to talk about. But they tend to talk about them in a not actually the things they did and more about who they were, which is interesting. but I want to talk about both. So before I start, I want to take a note about pronouns and how we talk about queer people in history. The way we think about gender and sexuality and sex and all of those things has changed innumerable ways over the course of history, depending on what region you are in of the world. I mean, people are very fond of saying there's 5 genders in the Talmud. Hi, future Fega doing editing here. It's actually 8 genders in the Talmud. Don't send me emails. I know I was wrong. I never met a number I liked. Okay, bye. Other people say that it's actually 5 sexes and it's about intersex people. I'm not a Talmudic scholar, but it's just an example of how things have not always been the sort of just male-female dichotomy. Although, to be fair, those genders in the Talmud are all about how those not male-female people interact with a law that is in that dichotomy, but neither here nor there. But as a result, the language that people use to describe themselves changes over time. And depending on the level of safety those people had, they speak more or less about their queerness, and it can be very hard for us as historians to say for sure. So an example of this would be someone like Baron von Steuben, who is very famous for having basically made the American Revolutionary Army at all functional. And there's a lot of people who say he was gay, and I personally think he probably was, but he never said he was.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we can't say, yeah, he was probably gay, but we need to be careful because we don't want to ascribe identities onto people who cannot speak for themselves. So there is a way we can talk about historical queerness without just saying, oh yeah, so-and-so was X.
Yeah.
Because these things change over time. And sometimes they are really just roommates. And I get people upset with me, and I always like to say, I am a gay person who loves finding hidden gay people in history. Like, I love it. And we need to be respectful of how they talked about themselves in their own time and recognize that the way we see things now are not always the way people saw things then.
Yeah.
So this takes us to pronouns I'm going to use. The Public Universal Friend didn't really say that much about what pronouns they wanted. They tended to avoid pronouns when they talked about themselves, and all of their followers used he pronouns. So in my notes, I mostly used he. I will probably slip up and say they, but I honestly don't think Public Universal Friend would have minded, but I don't know. So I'm going to try to keep with the he and the none, but we'll see what happens.
All right.
So I wrote this whole litany here. I didn't realize I wrote it down. I'm just ready to go. All right, this, like, historical gay people thing. Like,
yes,
you
have the elevator pitch down.
I do,
and I would have more to comment, but I think we should get into it.
Yes, this is a whole podcast. So, Public Universal Friend is sort of an exception to this because Public Universal Friend was very open about who he was.
All right.
So I think that's part of why people like him so much.
Yeah.
Because we can just say, yeah, that person was definitely some version of trans.
Uh-huh.
And people ascribe non-binariness to Public Universal Friend. That makes sense with the language we use now.
Right.
And I don't disagree with that. But when asked if he were a man or a woman, he said, I am that I am.
Cool.
So what does that mean? I don't know. His followers use he, him. Public Universal Friend very awkwardly just avoided pronouns entirely.
Nice.
We're out here. We're all out here doing our best.
For sure.
So, Public Universal Friend, their dead name was Jemima Wilkinson. This is the last time I'm going to use that name. When you read about Public Universal Friend, they tend to bounce back and forth between those names because a lot of detractors referred to him using his dead name. I'm going to try not to do that.
Yeah.
So he was born and raised as a woman on November 29th, 1752 in Cumberland, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And we don't know that much about his life before he became the Public Universal Friend.
Is this 1752?
Yeah, what did I say?
I know. Was that what you said? I'm just making sure that's what you said.
I hope that's what I said.
Yeah,
that's right.
All right, cool. All right, great.
It wouldn't be the first time I just say a completely different thing than what my brain is trying to do.
No, I completely relate.
I can talk to my wife Mazal about that sometime. My brain will be one place and my mouth is somewhere else. So, Public Universal Friend, born 1752. In Cumberland, Rhode Island. He was raised in the Society of Friends, which is the official term for the Quakers.
All right.
Quakerism is something that I always took for granted that people just knew what it was until I became a tour guide in Philadelphia and found out that people don't. It's just I grew up in this region and there's a lot of Quakers around.
Yeah.
The super, super nutshell version of Quakerism, this is incredibly nutshell, is that Quakers believe that every person has a spark of the divine inside of them. And what that means is that everyone is equal. And so that is regardless of gender, race, etc. It also means that they don't necessarily have a priest or somebody speaking at their weekly meetings. So they don't call it church, they call it meeting. And they just all sit in the room quietly until someone is moved to speak. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to go into, that doesn't mean there aren't any Quaker speakers. That's going to come up in this. But that is the sort of default.
Yes. Have you ever gone to a Quaker service?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I was quite young, so I was mostly bored.
Listen, the Quakers, we tend to speak about them this is not pertained to Public Universal Friend. This is pertained to Quakers in general. I feel like we speak about Quakers in a very romantic way sometimes. I feel like people do.
Oh, I do.
And I know, because
even though I know Quakers,
it's a very romantic ideal. But to be clear, I love Quakers. I love the history. It's fascinating. I went to a Quaker school. I've been to Quaker meetings.
My little sister went to a Quaker school for a while.
Wow. Oh, what did they have meetings?
I think so.
It's fascinating because it's I have a lot of feelings about it because it's not everybody can go to the meetings because it's not a thing for everybody. I thought I was gonna become a Quaker, then I went to the meetings and I was like, ooh, this is a lot of quiet.
It's a lot of quiet.
It's a lot of quiet
until, I just remember growing up hearing people kind of being like, oh, that meeting, yeah, they can't stop talking, or that meeting, they don't, and it's, people are people.
It's fascinating. No, and you grew up with it, and I'm sure people that grew up with it are much more used to it. I was like, this is so quiet, and so then I didn't become a Quaker.
Yeah, I mean, the one time I went, I was 13, so it was a challenge.
Yeah, I was dead set on becoming a Quaker until going to college and then starting to go to Quaker meetings and then being like, not for me. But anyway, very interesting because it definitely leads people to kind of be much more free thinking.
Yes,
back
and
then,
it also, especially at this time, so this is more recent to the development of Quakerism in England. There's this, very stringent pacifism and things like that. So it's really to the logical conclusion of that idea of the spark of the divine. Mm-hmm. So that's what Public Universal Friend grew up in. He was also very aware of the New Light Baptists, which was a new religious movement at the time that grew out of the First Great Awakening. So it was much more what we would now call evangelicals. So it's a lot sort of the tent meeting and things like that. In a lot of ways, very, I would imagine, very not that similar to the Quakers.
Yes.
In philosophy, I believe they weren't that far off from each other, but the way they enacted that was different.
Interesting.
So this was a really tumultuous time to be growing up.
Yeah.
So he was born in 1752, so by the time he's becoming an adult, the Revolutionary War is happening. And Quakers around the country are struggling with the Revolutionary War because, if you're a strict pacifist, what are you supposed to do? Because people would accuse Quakers of being loyalists. And it's not that they were loyal. The Quakers, there was no love lost between the British monarchy and the Quakers.
Yeah.
The Quakers were very, very harshly persecuted.
Yeah.
In England. But they were really stringent pacifists. And you could get in a lot of trouble for even engaging with boycotts. That said, to give you an idea of where Public Universal Friend's family was, his brothers did fight in the Revolutionary War. And because people were going off and fighting and kind of bending the rules for this Revolutionary War, there was a backlash in a lot of Quaker meetings of becoming much more stringent.
Yeah.
Also at this time, Public Universal Friend is reaching an age where marriage was probably on the horizon. Also, in February 1776, he was disciplined by his meeting because he was attending New Light Baptist meetings. And so he was, quote-unquote, disowned in September 1776. So he was disciplined in February 1776 and then disowned in September, which is also called being read out of meeting, depending on which meeting you're at.
Oh, no.
In October of that same year, Public Universal Friend fell ill with an unknown illness. We think it was probably typhus, which, frankly, when I read these historical accounts, I'm like, you know, from this era, it's like everything was typhus. Like,
it's always
like you don't know what it was, it's probably typhus.
Gosh.
It's like later on, it's like, you don't know what it is, it's probably tuberculosis.
Yep. Here we go again with the typhus.
I get the typhus.
Yep. He's got the typhus.
So he was bedridden and near death. And to the extent that, like, they called for the doctor and it was, like, trying to do end-of-life stuff, like, they were really sure that he was dying. But then the fever broke. And he rose from his bed. This is the story. He rose from his bed.
All right.
And said that Jemima Wilkinson had died and gone to heaven, and her body was reanimated by God as the Public Universal Friend to preach his word.
Wow. Okay.
And I always thought Public Universal Friend was just this sort of bizarre term that he came up with on his own in the tradition of I've worked with a lot of young non-binary kids, and I love the names that they decide on for themselves. Like there was I've known kids who went by like Sock.
Yeah.
And things like that. And I just, and Glowworm. Like, I love it. I love it so much. And I also looked at Public Universal Friend and said, see, we've always been doing this.
Yeah.
Non-binary people.
It's not anything new. Yeah.
But it actually did mean something. It was a term for traveling Quaker preachers. So these are people who travel around and speak to Quaker meetings.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a completely random thing, but it was a title that he just took on as his only name.
All right.
So he he began preaching around New England, both outside and at churches when they allowed him to speak at churches. And his sermons were rambling, but in a way that was really typical for Quakers at the time. So Quaker sermons were meant to be sort of off the cuff, not planned, and they were they were meant to be sort of not as like researched and put together as you would have seen in a mainline Protestant church.
Interesting.
So people who were expecting that thought he was a very good speaker. And people who were coming from other traditions would be like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
His beliefs were mostly in line with the Society of Friends, that everyone has access to the divine, both men and women, all races, etc. Also pro-emancipation and encourage manumission. So manumission is our fancy SAT word for when the legal process of freeing a formerly enslaved person.
Got it.
He believed in free will, that all people can achieve salvation, and they do that by living a life without sin and following him.
It's a pretty... Oh, okay.
Spoke a little too soon.
At first I was like, all right, pretty cool for the time. Then we hit the...
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you only have one option.
Like, just because they're queer doesn't mean they're not a cult leader.
Queer. Do you ever watch Trixie and Katya?
I have not.
They rate some. Well, they do a lot of stuff, but they rate shows. Like, it's called Trixie and Katya. I like to watch. I don't like Netflix, but I like Trixie and Katya, and it's fun because they read all the shows, and they are like one of my favorite like talking points that Trixie has is that like gay people can be bad too. Like gay people are mean. Like we're not nice. Like stop trying to say that we're not. We're very frequently mean. Gay people can be all types. Have you seen I don't know. You've probably seen the last couple of days. I haven't actually watched the video, but it's like the person who's like, I'm a trans woman and I'm a conservative. And
I have not.
Oh my gosh. And that's the whole bit of the video I've seen because everybody's just stitching it. And now people like are just downloading the video and stitching it, hand stitching it because like they don't want to promote this person. But anyway, I'm interested. I want to go and find the original video because like I'm fascinated to hear the rest. But everybody, it's been funny.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing. There's an episode of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds that the villain is trans, like the actor is trans and the villain is trans, and that has nothing to do with anything in the plot. It just is.
It just is. Yeah.
And I thought that was a really like just shows that we are in the right direction.
Yeah.
That we can do that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so the whole all people can achieve salvation was actually kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Because where he was up in New England, there were a lot of Puritans who came from the Calvinist tradition, which believes in predestination. So this idea that everyone, the moment you're born, it's already decided if you are going to heaven or hell. And he said, no, actually, anybody can go to heaven, but you have to you have to live a sin-free life and follow the public universal friend.
Still pretty stringent.
Yes. And so when people asked him what his religious role was, he called himself the Comforter.
Okay.
Which it comes from, I think, a quote from somewhere in the New Testament.
It's a Jesus thing.
Yeah, raised up by God to give comfort to his people.
Yeah.
Rather than claiming to be Jesus himself, of which he would be accused of at various points. This is going to come up again.
Oh.
So the other part of it is this was I forgot to say this from the beginning. This was a little bit of a doomsday cult.
Oh.
I know, I'm sitting here throwing cult around when I was so careful about it a couple
And
episodes ago.
Well, we talked about it then, we've covered it.
I guess I feel a little more free with it because it's like my people.
It's also like at a certain point, cult's a cult. And it's good to...
Or it's a high control group.
It's a high control group. They could leave whenever they want.
But doomsday, the end of the world is coming very soon.
Got it.
And you'd better get yourself sorted because end of the world's coming.
Okay.
Americans at the time saw the millennium as which is the 1,000 years of Jesus's rule in Christian thought as a time of plenty brought in by the work of humanity, after which Jesus appeared. So this is very familiar to us as Jewish people, this idea of the time of the Mashiach. So this time when the Messiah is going to come and everything's going to be peachy and great. But there was a different like, so most Americans believed that like we have to work at making the world a better place so that Jesus will come and we'll have this time of the millennium.
Okay.
The Public Universal Friend, on the other hand, said that Jesus would come as a part of a number of cataclysmic events, which is a much darker vision of the future and actually much more common today. Like if you see like the sort of the Left Behind series and so forth, that is the same.
What's the Left Behind series?
Oh my gosh. This is a I think an age difference between us. This was a book series that was very popular when I was in like high school amongst evangelical Christians, and I have not read it. But
oh my gosh, is it like
it begins so it's a book series that is supposed to be about the end days, and so the first thing that happens in the book, as I understand it, is a bunch of people just disappear and their clothes are just like laid out where they were, and those are all the people that like were raptured, that like went to heaven, and then everybody else is left behind and they have to like deal with what's coming.
That's dark stuff.
It's very dark.
Yeah.
I actually watched a YouTube creator who grew up evangelical was reading parts of like a Left Behind for Teens book that she read as a kid.
Oh my gosh.
And it was interesting to hear her talk about that and hear it, because I never would have read it myself. Yeah. So that's where Public Universal Friend landed on those things. He also had some supernatural claims to himself. Early on, he claimed to do faith healing, which is when somebody just like, prays over you and you're healed.
Sure.
We see this a lot at mega churches, and that oftentimes is fake. I'm just going to say it. A lot of times it's faked. It's, you have somebody in a wheelchair who's not actually disabled and they become cured and they can walk and, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
plenty to say about the healing magic and all of that around the world. I have less to say, fewer good things to say about laying on of hands in the Pentecostal scenario.
Yeah, so Public Universal Friend started off doing that, but then people would not actually get better. So he would say, oh, well, they just don't believe in me enough.
Yeah, see, that's where it gets toxic.
Yes, but he stopped doing them.
Okay.
But he always did prophecy, both of large cosmic events and those of individual people, to the extent that actually some of his detractors accused him of what's called hot reading.
Uh-huh.
So cold reading is the thing you see with, like, these people who claim to talk to dead people and are like, I'm getting an impression of the letter B, Bob, Bobby, you know, and Boylan, and then someone goes, my uncle's named Boylan, and you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's cold reading.
Yeah.
Hot reading is when you get information about somebody ahead of time and then use it. So some of those same sort of people will, like, search the people who bought tickets on social media and things like that. So people accuse Public Universal Friend of hot reading. Another part of his beliefs, celibacy.
Oh.
That was the ultimate. I know.
Downer.
These various new religious groups are really into celibacy. Celibacy was the goal, but not necessarily like the universal. So
Okay.
the idea is if you got married, it's not that you could never have sex, but you could not have sex for lustful purposes.
But that's the
Whatever
fun
that
kind.
means. Yeah. And as a result, we do see much lower birth rates amongst Public Universal Friend's followers. It's not that surprising.
Yep.
And there's some indication that he needed to approve all marriages. There's no, like, we're going to get into this. All of the information we have about Public Universal Friend comes from either his detractors or his supporters.
Okay.
Not a lot of in between. So everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, just a different grain of salt.
Yeah.
So his detractors claimed that he insisted on approving all marriages. We don't know. Maybe it's plausible based on the stories that exist.
All right.
Actually, the other weird thing that we have as a source is people's dream journals. So it was, like, in vogue, not just for followers of Public Universal Friend, but also for, like, Quakers and New Light Baptists and so forth to keep dream journals, because there was this idea that, like, you could learn more about yourself and your, you know, what God has in store for you from your dreams. And so they would wake up and write in their dream journals. So we'd have, like, no information about, like, how things actually ran, but we know what people were dreaming about. It's really, that's fascinating. Yeah. I need to get my hands on those.
Wow.
They just made reference to it in the book I read, and it was fascinating.
Whoa. That's so cool. Because we don't get that very often in history, is what people were dreaming about. And it's a really fun way of looking at things.
Well, based on these ones we have, apparently they're dreaming about Public Universal Friend a lot.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Also, part of their beliefs, women answered to God, not their husbands. This was also really new idea.
Yeah.
So some people would leave their families then to follow Public Universal Friend, because the idea is if a woman answers to God, not her family, if she wants to follow the Public Universal Friend and her husband says no, the correct thing to do is to leave your husband.
Yeah. Huh.
However, also whole families would join.
Okay.
But all of this is a package, really puts society's notion of gender and class in question. And anytime that happens, people get upset. So the Revolutionary War had already upended the concept of gender by creating this idea of a Republican mother. And that's, you know, Republican with a little r.
Yeah.
And that's because, you know, the men went off to war and the women were left with even more responsibilities than they already had. And I mean, it's the same thing we saw after World War II.
Yep.
I mean, it changes the dynamic of the home and the workplace and so forth. And also, there was this big fear about America becoming a classless society. So people were really sensitive to, like, what you were wearing and what that said about you. And Quakers got the brunt of this a lot, because Quakers always dressed, well, we're supposed to always dress plain. Plain being plain with a big P. This idea of not drawing attention to yourself through a lot of, like, decoration.
Yeah. Protestant stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are both things that were Public Universal Friend was doing, and they were very upsetting to people who had the power at the time. And also the Declaration of Independence was saying everybody was equal. And here's this barely educated person that his detractor saw as a woman from the backwoods of Rhode Island claiming to be a prophet. If you're an upper class man, you don't want this to catch on.
Yeah.
This is bad news for those people. And to make it even worse, Public Universal Friend dressed in a gender and class ambiguous manner. So generally he wore his hair loose around his shoulders, which women did not do at that time. It was a very like masculine thing to do.
Yeah.
He wore a wide brimmed beaver hat, which was common among Quaker men. So think of Quaker Oats.
Okay.
What he's wearing, that's what I'm talking about. He wore loose clerical robes that did not show his body shape. He wore a cravat, which is like a floofy bow tie.
Yeah.
And he did dress in a variety of colors.
Wow.
So I know I always had this mental image of him always wearing black and grays and stuff, but he like wore purple and stuff. Like he wore whatever color.
Interesting.
And some of the female followers dressed in the same manner as him, which, again, if you are an upper class man, you're like, yikes, no, please don't do this.
Yeah.
And they were described in traditionally masculine ways by detractors. And men in the movement were portrayed as emotional and other traditionally feminine traits. So when I talk about masculine traits and feminine traits, these were like things that we have these now too, where we have certain words that people tend to use when they're talking about men and words that they tend to use when they're talking about women. This existed then too. It looked different than now. It was a lot of words like decisive would be like a very masculine term.
Right.
And indecisive was very feminine.
Interesting.
That sort of thing. So when
men take action.
Yeah. So when you read about the followers, it's all flipped. And this is, I thought about this a lot when I was reading up for this, because I have two questions. One, obviously, the detractors are probably to an extent just trying to like be like, this person is scary, right? Like they're writing for like a newspaper or something, and they want to warn people off from this because it's, you know, going to take down society or whatever. But that said, gay people, and I mean that in the big sort of umbrella sense, we tend to hang out together. Like we tend to find each other.
Yeah.
So I can't help but wonder if there were some very masculine women and feminine men in that group.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't really tell.
Yeah.
One of the most important people in this group, besides obviously the Public Universal Friend, was Sarah Richards. And she was really the right-hand person of Public Universal Friend. She would dress in the way the Public Universal Friend dressed. She was the one who handled a lot of his like finances and things like that. All the worldly matters that he didn't want to be a part of. And like I said, the powers that be really freaked out by this. And the press in Philadelphia especially was where we can see a lot of that criticism. They were not kind. They were constantly attacking the Public Universal Friend, accusing him of being a con artist and just taking from his followers through tricks, like the previously mentioned hot reading. Also accused of being involved with murder.
Oh, no.
This is a wild story.
Oh, no.
So Sarah Wilson was a follower who claimed very publicly to the press to have survived a murder attempt by a fellow follower named Abigail Dayton. So what Sarah said was that she was having a conversation with other followers about supernatural phenomena. And she was saying that they could be explained away by other means. This is a woman after my own heart. I love poking holes in supernatural things.
Oh,
It just makes it all the more fun when you can't.
For sure.
But she expressed that, and according to her, Abigail Dayton responded and said, "Take care what I said against them, for very strange things happened to people who had talked against the friend, that sudden deaths had happened to some and great misfortunes to others."
Oh, no.
And Sarah, there's a whole blow-by-blow that I'm not going to go into, but people used to sleep all in the same bed at the time because beds were, a hot commodity. So Sarah was in the same room, same bed, whatever, as Abigail Dayton, and there's this whole, Abigail walks around the bed and looks at Sarah and then like goes into another room to get something and comes back, and it's a whole like, then she did this, then she did this.
Okay.
But Sarah said that when she saw Dayton sneaking around, she switched places in bed with somebody else. Mm-hmm. And she fell asleep, which I'm like, if you're really that worried, we're doing she fall asleep. But she fell asleep, and she was awoken to Dayton strangling the woman who was in her former spot.
Oh, no.
And here's the thing, though, is this murder attempt, if it happened in a room with a bunch of other people in it.
Yeah.
And nobody else came forward to corroborate either story.
Interesting.
Now, is that because it didn't happen, or is it because the Public Universal Friend had such a hold on people's behavior? Again,
Who's to say?
Not me.
Not me.
It also she could have dreamed it. Like, she could have genuinely believed it and just dreamed it. That's Sarah Richards, again, the right-hand person of the Public Universal Friend, claimed that the murder was actually the devil pretending to be Abigail Dayton. So,
okay,
take that
possession
as you will.
Kind of
no,
stuff?
not in possession.
Okay.
Like taking the form of Abigail.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, the press made a lot of hay with this, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
And the Public Universal Friend finally was like, "I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done with all this. I can't deal with the naysayers. I just, he was like doing things like sneaking in and out of Philadelphia so that like mobs of people wouldn't yell at him. Like, it was intense.
Yeah.
So he decided that he was going to just form his own town in central New York.
Oh.
Of just his followers. And this was actually really interesting for me because the book I read, which I should say what it is, let me put it on my bag.
I'm interested.
I brought it like I was going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
It's called The Public Universal Friend, Jemima Wilkinson and Religious Enthusiasm in Revolutionary America by Paul B. Moyer.
Okay.
I don't love how he handles the pronouns. He basically changes between he and she depending on what perspective he's writing from, which is confusing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't love it. But
confusing and like has a dead name on the cover and stuff.
Yeah, I don't love that either.
No.
But his analysis is excellent.
Cool.
And he did a lot of really intense research into things like those dream journals.
Yeah.
And this next part, which I got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to have to accept that I'm not going to 100% understand this. So
sometimes we have to say that to ourselves. I know that I've had that feeling very recently.
Yeah. So Public Universal Friend, wanted to get land in central New York. Mm-hmm. And this was a time when people were making their fortunes or losing fortunes in land speculating. Okay. And this is the kind of thing that I just sort of like learned, like, oh yeah, so-and-so was super rich and then they lost all their money land speculating. I never really looked into what that actually meant. Yeah. And this book went into it deep. So because it's important. It was very complicated to get land. There was a lot of legal gray area between Massachusetts and New York because as they did a land grab from, forgive me if this is wrong, Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which I was taught were the Iroquois, but that is an English word put on them. So they were grabbing land from them and they leased it from them for 999 years. Okay. And of course, there's so much history of like the sort of tricks that white people did to mislead indigenous people who, to be clear, were not like unaware of the law and things like that. When I say tricks, I mean like
just lying.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I know when you say tricks, it's like it sounds like, oh, they couldn't help. No, I don't mean that. I mean like they were lied to.
They were just lied to. Yeah.
Because they'd say, oh, so do you mean it like this? And the white people would be like, yeah. And they would not.
Just straight. I mean, like, people just, and then, like, people will, even if they had a treaty, they just break it.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. So this is all wrapped up in Public Universal Friend trying to get land. And like I said, there's this legal gray area between the states of Massachusetts and New York. So Public Universal Friend's followers bought land. And then after they purchased it, the line between Massachusetts and New York moved because someone had messed up where the line was. Like, if someone went to, like, measure and they got it wrong.
Oh, my gosh.
So they lost their land that way. Money was how where the money came from was from investors from the society's members, with the idea that the larger the investment, the larger the property they would get. Mm-hmm. So when they lost a huge amount of their land because of this disagreement over where the border was, that was a lot. That meant people were going to get very little. So William Potter and Thomas Hathaway, those are going to be important characters.
Okay.
They handled most of the dealings after the first attempts went poorly. They took over. Basically, they were like, listen, you messed this up. We're going to do this. Mm-hmm. And they were successful in getting more land, but then they distributed it unfairly, giving much of it to themselves and none to the smaller investors who had been promised to have at least enough land to survive. So the idea is that that everyone would have enough to do subsistence farming, and they didn't do that.
Got it.
And the first town was called City Hill. So Public Universal Friend shows up and is mad that people were left without land. And he decided eventually to create his own new, smaller community called Jerusalem. That was pretty much just consisted of people who had been, like, tricked by William Potter and Thomas Hathaway. And so, as you might imagine, those are people very loyal to Public Universal Friend. Because he just gave them land because, you know.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was the right thing to do. But and they called themselves the Sisterhood. It was almost entirely women who were the head of their households, which could mean a lot of different things. That could mean that they were a single mother with children. It could mean they were alone, like that they were single. It could mean that there are men in the house, but their men are like boarders, you know, things like that. But these were mostly women who were the head of their household, and they called themselves a Sisterhood. And and the other thing was, like, so a lot of them were, like, widowed or never married, and they had no intention of changing that fact, which was the, like, boogeyman of the time.
For sure.
All this land, by the way, was in Sarah Richards' name, so that Public Universal Friend would not become embroiled in worldly matters.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, though, Sarah Richards died at age 36. Which was really tragic. The two of them, Sarah Richards and Public Universal Friend, were incredibly close. And so
what did she die of? Was it typhus?
I don't know. We're just gonna say typhus.
Yeah.
Typhus. I don't know.
Typhus.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So Sarah Richards dies at age 36, which is, by the way, that's how old I am. It's scary.
Oh gosh.
And then the land passes to Rachel Mallon and Sarah's daughter Eliza. And Puff continued. I wrote Puff so I didn't have to write Public Universal Friend over and over. And I hate when people call him Puff.
Oh no!
I'm sorry. A lot of people do it, and there's nothing morally corrupt with it. It just, I don't like it.
Yeah.
But I wrote it in my notes because I was lazy.
For sure.
Public Universal Friend continued to raise Eliza after Sarah's death. So that's the level of closeness they were. They were family. Around this time also, all this stuff's happening at the same time, some of the men in the community started to become unhappy with the Public Universal Friend. They desired land, money, and power, and saw a quote-unquote woman holding so much more property than them as threatening that. Now, this was not most men in the society, to be clear. It's easy to get into the story and be like, oh, all the men. No, actually, the vast majority.
Specifically toxic ones.
Yeah, the vast majority of the men in the society were very happy with their circumstances.
Yeah.
But the people who specifically were awful were William Potter, Thomas Hathaway.
Those guys.
Yep. Enoch Mallon, who you might recognize has the same last name as Rachel Mallon.
Yes.
He also married Eliza.
Oh.
Yep, James Parker, and there are others, but those are the ringleaders of this. And they just generally, you know, people would get annoyed with Public Universal Friend and want to leave. And most people, like normal people leaving a religion, would just do that. Like they would just leave.
Yeah.
And these guys couldn't do that. They needed to bring Public Universal Friend down.
Okay. Oh.
So first they tried to have him arrested for blasphemy. Which, this is amazing. So you know all those stories about people trying to assassinate Rasputin and how they never could? It feels a little like that. Nice. So the first time they tried to arrest him, they tried to grab him from his horse and he just galloped away.
Oh, wow.
The second time they tried to, I love this. The second time they tried to arrest him at his home, and the Sisterhood, remember them?
Oh, yeah.
The Sisterhood all attacked them and tore their clothing.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Girls!
Yeah.
Wow.
And the third time, they came in the dead of night with over 30 men when Public Universal Friend was sick in bed. And that was when they were successful.
Wow.
But like knowing that Public Universal Friend is sick and he still brought 30 people because you're like, nope, we're not messing.
Not taking any chances.
So it's actually kind of incredible that Public Universal Friend wasn't brought up on blasphemy charges before this.
Yeah.
But he was not found guilty because the judges decided that blasphemy was in fact not against the law in the state of New York. Which makes sense because this is now, you're now in the era of the Constitution. You have separation of church and state and so forth.
And you have free speech, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, of course, these are ideals that didn't always pan out.
Yeah.
But that was what they determined. And in fact, the judge allowed the Public Universal Friend to give a sermon in court. And the judge commented that he thought the sermon was very good.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, if you're taking Public Universal Friend to court, like, and he takes the stand, he's gonna be he sounds like he's very charismatic.
Oh, he had to have been.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, there you go.
Yeah. So that failed, but those men did not give up.
Yeah.
So they started going after his being the Public Universal Friend's legal claim to the land. Public Universal Friend did not actually own anything. So what this did was they looked really closely at the will of Sarah Richards and tried to see if the land was actually legally passed to Rachel Mallon. At this point, Eliza, who is Sarah Richards' daughter, grew up and had eloped with one of the Public Universal Friend's detractors.
Wow.
When I say eloped, I mean like full on, like
Secret.
Went out the window in the dead of night kind of thing.
Wow.
If they could prove that the will was not valid, the land would go to her and therefore legally her husband. So there's years and years and years of legal battles and went all the way to the top court in New York. And Public Universal Friend won every single appeal. Wow. And as a result, the Public Universal Friends left a super explicit will. He even included his dead name to make sure it would be legal.
Wow.
He had learned his lesson from that. And this really depleted the society's funds because the lawyers, like, there were various points where there were like settlements offered and lawyers would say like, you should just take this because this is going to be so expensive to continue to fight. And the Public Universal Friend was like, no, I'm right. Like, I don't care. We're going to keep fighting. And they won in the end.
Yeah.
And when they wrote their will, they were like, the Public Universal Friend, the artist formerly known as Jemima Wilkinson, basically, to make sure it was legal. He left the society's funds to Rachel and Margaret Mallon to take care of any members of the society who needed help.
Nice.
Now, at this point, Public Universal Friend is getting a little older. And while people still talk about him and are visiting him because he's sort of a curiosity, there's actually a very funny story that I didn't write down for some reason. Very funny story about a aristocrat from Europe coming and being very upset because how dinner at Public Universal Friend's house worked was the Public Universal Friend would go with Rachel Mallon to another room and eat dinner. And nobody could eat until Public Universal Friend was done. But you also couldn't like watch the Public Universal Friend eat.
Okay.
And this aristocrat was like, excuse me, who do you think you are? Do you know who I am?
Yeah.
I'm the Marquis to something something.
Yeah. Oh, that's wild though.
Yeah. So there's still there's still an economy of charisma. But people, there are not a lot of kids being born because of the celibacy thing. And then the kids who are being born are not really that interested in sticking around with the society.
Interesting.
Especially because Public Universal Friend's not as charismatic anymore. Yeah. He's getting older.
Yeah.
That very famous picture of him is when he's a little later on in life. And so he leaves his funds to the Mallons to take care of people after his death. And in the end, no spiritual leader stepped up to take his place. So he dies, and nobody steps in. There's no, for example, with the Church of Latter-day Saints, when Joseph Smith died, Brigham Young stepped up as the spiritual leader.
Got it.
There was no Brigham Young
Right.
of Public Universal Friend.
Right.
And so the Public Universal Friend Society basically became a mutual aid society.
Huh.
The Mallons would just give money to people who needed it until eventually James Brown Jr. was the last person to take care of the society's finances, and he passed away, and that was the end of the Society of the Public Universal Friend.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah. So Public Universal Friend, I think, has captured the imagination of a lot of queer people because, I mean, first of all, just having somebody who lives so unabashedly themselves in a time when, I mean, it's never easy, but it was super not easy.
Definitely.
Like, he could have been brought in for, like, cross-dressing charges and things like that. It was an extremely brave thing to do. So while I may disagree with his religious movement, it was still an incredibly brave thing to do, and he gave a lot of power to women to realize that they had power themselves, and they could do things like dress however they wanted, or not have a husband, or leave the husband they had,
owning land, all these things.
Pretty
Cool.
And also the what it says about class. He wasn't particularly educated. He was from the backwoods of Rhode Island, and he still became this prophet without a lot of education. So this was really revolutionary in a time where a lot of revolutionary things were happening. And it's also where a lot of the backlash came from, because we know this is, you know, we're going into the Victorian era where gender is very strictly monitored, or whatever. That's not the right word, but
it's very strict, like policed or scrutinized.
Yeah, that's the word.
This is with, like, I was doing some research on this with eyebrows. Like, they're very, like, every bit, I think, of, like, a woman's appearance was very scrutinized.
Right, and you see this actually when people talk about seeing the Public Universal Friend speak. They are, it is weird. People will go on and on about how beautiful he is. And how he's a very comely person. And always use feminine pronouns and descriptions and things like that. And you see ones where they're like, you know, if they just wore like normal clothes, they'd be so pretty.
Of course.
And we see that when it went from it being a curiosity to actual power, that's when people like lost it.
Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, so like once this person actually holds sway over other people, then we can't have that.
Yeah, or it looks like maybe their ideas might permeate the outside society.
Yeah.
Because, you know, what's to stop someone from saying, you know, I think Public Universal Friend is kind of goofy.
Yeah.
But I'm into this being, you know, answering only to God, not my husband.
But it's fascinating also how far it seems his charisma took him.
Oh my gosh.
Well.
He rode that wave.
He rode that wave. And that's there's something to say about the power of charisma.
And I'm of the belief, and I'm not basing this on very much, so grain of salt. I think he was genuine.
Sure.
I think he genuinely thought that he was a prophet.
Like Father Divine.
Yeah. I think he really felt that he was a prophet.
Yeah.
I don't think he was trying to trick people.
Sure.
I think that he also probably used techniques like hot reading. There's a story of somebody happened to overhear something and they got told the Public Universal Friend and it came up later. You know, it's these sort of things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that was beneath him.
Yeah.
To consolidate his power.
Yeah.
But we're still talking about him in part because it's still revolutionary.
Yeah, that's true.
We're still talking about this gender stuff. We're still talking about who has power in relationships.
Yeah.
We're still talking about class. Anybody who tells you that America is a classless society is trying to sell you something.
Definitely Andy Warhol. I just went into an Andy Warhol deep dive last night. Not really a deep dive because that would be too deep, and I don't really feel like going that deep. Andy Warhol is too big of a thing. With that, it makes me very uncomfortable. He is interesting, but I don't even know if I should go into what I even. That's the whole other rabbit hole. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the Public Universal Friend.
Wow. I really learned something today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. Because I've seen pictures and I did not know what the deal was.
My wife gave me a print of the Public Universal Friend for Hanukkah.
Oh my gosh. That's pretty
and I
funny.
was just starting to read this book and I was like, I don't know if I want to picture him on my wall.
Yeah. Yeah, it could it's like an interest. It's like, I would lean him on the bookshelf or something.
Yeah, well, right now he's being leaned up against books on the mantle, and I haven't bothered to move him.
There you go.
Because I tried to lean him up against the wall on the mantle, and my wife was like, "No, it needs to be front and center."
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
So we'll figure out a spot.
And he has quite the stare, also.
Yes, he does.
He definitely looks at you.
Well, this print that was the artist made, he's got a very friendly look.
Nice. Well, I feel like, any artist that depicts, Public Universal Friend today probably is has a sort of, a rosy notion of who he is.
I'm sure.
And probably just sees him as this lovely person from history, which honestly, what's the harm in that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an issue. You want to
Yeah.
go run off into the woods and have your lovely queer commune, whatever.
Do your thing. That's the thing is people like to, I don't, if you have a slightly problematic faith, I wouldn't even call him that problematic, right? Other than he just thought he was a prophet or I don't know.
I think tried to have a pretty high level of control over the group.
So that's not cool. But also I don't mind. Anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's people have their faves from history, and I'm not trying to ruin anybody's fave.
Yes, if you are loving and obsessed with Public Universal Friend, I think you should keep doing that because even though he definitely was trying to create a high control group, he still represents a lot of interesting
stuff.
This queer person in the 18th century, and that is super cool.
It's super cool, and it's interesting to look at I've been thinking a lot about really complicated Yayoi, people like Yayoi Kusama right now who are just these very complicated people, and I realized that for me the more interesting thing is not so much the person themselves, because humans are complicated and there's only so much we know about somebody's inner life, but what you can look at really closely is how people react to them. And I feel what you were saying was where it's the most interesting thing about Public Universal Friend is also just what happens when society, the norms were tampered with in that way, and how people reacted to it. And it tells us so much.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, it's time for us to have Shabbos dinner.
It is.
So,
yum! Yay!
Turn this off.
Yeah. Bye. Oh.
Thank you so much for listening to D-Listers of History. If you enjoyed yourself, be sure to subscribe and drop us a review on whatever platform you listen on. A huge thank you to April Keys for the use of the song Misfit from her album Mountain View. You can find her on all the various social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and sometimes TikTok at D-Listers of History, no hyphens. A huge shout out to the folks supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support us and get access to all sorts of exclusive content, become a patron of this program like Michelle. All of this and more can be found on our website, dlistersofhistory.com. Again, no hyphens, just smush it together. Our next episode is going to be coming out March 6th. Our episodes drop on the first and third Mondays of each month. And now for an episode-relevant audio drop.
Hi, I'm Jody Friend from Public Universal Friend. This is my band's small studio session. Thanks for watching.